videos we've been learning about Sass nesting, but there's just a few more tips to learn. So we've finished learning the fundamentals of selector nesting, but we can improve the Sass style sheet we've created a little bit more by applying the principles of nesting to properties instead of selectors. So here you can see we have the same basic page that we've been working on, and switching over to the code editor, we have the exact same markup, but this is really what we're going to be interested in, our Sass style sheet. Now, in many instances, you'll have a whole list of properties that are all related. For example, you might have several font properties that are all being applied to the same selector. And while it's perfectly fine when there's just one or two, you can shorten those up with Sass to make them a lot more manageable. So here at the top of our style sheet, we have a pretty good example of that. We have two font properties, but we want to combine them into one, and we can do that with some code like this. So I'll go ahead and type out font here, and we don't need font there, and we don't need font there. Alright, now if we go over to our terminal, and we start watching this file with Sass watch style.sass style.css, which is the file we want this to be compiled into. And now we're watching it, and if we go back to our browser and refresh, you can see that our page looks exactly the same, which in this case is what we want. We're only trying to improve the organization of the style sheet without actually changing any of the styling. So I'm going to switch back to the code here, and you can see that I've started out with the font property first, and then nested under that we have family and size. These are two properties that are actually part of the font property normally, but they can be broken out into separate properties. Writing it out this way, though, makes it a lot more readable. Just to make sure we're clear on this, let's go ahead and try one more example on this list item down here. So again, I'm just going to go ahead and type font and indent these, and we can go ahead and get rid of the word font just like that. Now if we switch back to the browser and refresh, you can see that once again nothing has changed or gone wrong, which is exactly what we were hoping for. Remember, Sass is watching our every move in this file, so our CSS will actually update automatically every time we save our Sass file. So besides the font property, you can also nest other properties like margins, padding, and more. It's pretty useful, and while it may not reduce the number of lines in your code, it will certainly improve readability. Now finally, that completely wraps things up for nesting. But before we finish this video, I'd like to show you a related concept called selector inheritance. The difference between this and nesting might not be readily apparent if I try to explain it first, so let's just go ahead and dive right into an example and then we'll go over it. So I'm actually going to switch back to the browser, and let's say that in our sidebar here we wanted to create a new section and really highlight it with a yellow background. So let's go ahead and first create that new section in our HTML. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down to our sidebar here, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this section here, and I'm just going to title this section README with an exclamation point, and I'm going to go ahead and change this class from section to, we'll say something like important section. Now we need to highlight it with a yellow background. In other words, we need this div to inherit all the properties of the other sections here, and we also need to add a yellow background. Now we could do this a number of ways, such as creating a class called yellow or yellow background and sticking it on the div in addition to the section, but that's not great practice. We could also create a separate class or ID, but that's not always possible or ideal. Now, these would basically be our options with CSS, but we have Sass, which is a bit more powerful. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to our Sass style sheet here, and I'm going to scroll down to where we have our section, and let's go ahead and select this div and then inherit the properties from another selector, and then we'll go ahead and add the yellow background. So I'm just going to go ahead and skip down here, and we want to make sure that this is on the same level as our section here, and we'll go ahead and select this div, important section, and I'll use the keyword extend, and we'll put the yellow background on it, and we'll go over this in just a second. So I'll go ahead and save and go back to the browser and refresh, and there we have our new section, and it has all of the same styling as our other sections, and it also has a yellow background. Now let's go ahead and switch back to the code so that we can look at this in more detail. I've used the @ sign with the keyword extend here, and then I've added the selector that I want it to inherit from, which in this case is section. After that, I can put whatever normal properties I want. Now, this was a very simple example, and as I mentioned, there are other ways of doing this, but when you need several properties to inherit from several other properties from other selectors, this can be very useful. That about wraps things up for nesting and selector inheritance, but in upcoming videos about Sass, we'll be taking a look at mixins and variables.